WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net, spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of sport. I bring in a guy that was a little bit legendary in my day back at Sports First and the Baltimore News American, and then later the Evening Sun, and he worked many years in Philadelphia with the likes of Jack Gibbons and other types and Dick Girardi types who gave me a break along life's highway. He is an author, he is a longtime sports writer, and Oriole fan, historian, guy who drives down from Philadelphia a couple times a year and watches Oriole baseball and bitches about it on the internet. We welcome Mark Kram Jr. back onto the program in advance of not only Oriole baseball, but also his book on Smoking Joe Frazier, where, you know, I talked to Girardi about horse racing up in Philly, and Philly's great because it has all these old scribe guys, and I read all that awful stuff about Conlon in the end a couple of weeks ago. It kind of came up again. But it was such a music town with, you know, with White-Eyed Soul and all the incredible music up there. It was also a town of Rocky and fights and Joe Frazier and a town of basketball. And I saw the Phil Martelli story. And every time I have a dick on and we talk about going to the Palestra, because I've never been to the Palestra. But I mean, I saw Live Aid up there. JFK Stadium and all this sports tradition. But man, the boxing thing was a thing that was your thing. And this Smoking Joe story, I mean, you're putting this book together. Philadelphia has so many stories besides like the Eagles and Bryce Harper, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it was a great fight town, really.
Oh, yeah.
Probably the best, really, when you get right down to it. In fact, when Joe was coming up in this early 60s, there were better fights in the gym than there were at the actual fights themselves. The gyms were absolutely some ferocious fights took place there. So they used to call him the king of the gym, who was the best fighter in the gym, and it ruined a lot of careers. Stan Hochman, the late Stan Hochman, who was a great columnist for the Daily News, my colleague, said that gym wars ruined more careers than cocaine, and he's right.
Wow.
Joe came up through really lively times. His just coming up from the poorest area in America, in Beaufort, South Carolina, taking the bus at age 15 up to New York, and then later coming to Philadelphia. Geez, I mean, just a heroic journey. And
why Philly? To fight, literally?
I'm sorry?
Why Philly? What brought him to Philly?
Well, his sister lived here. He had gone to New York and to live with some relatives, and he was really he had nothing going for him. He was a chubby guy. He was getting into a lot of trouble. He was stealing cars with another guy. And they sent him down to Philly to be with his sister, and she told him, look, if you get in trouble down here, there's nothing I can do for you, but, so you should go over to the PAL, the Police Athletic League. And he went over there ostensibly to lose weight, so he could fit into his clothes. And he, Yank Durham, the legendary trainer, spotted him and could see that he really hit the heavy bag with some ferocity. And it took him under his wing, and the cops were good to him. They sort of kept him on the straight and narrow, and he always was appreciative of that throughout his life. And so that's how it got going for him, and he became a real monument in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I don't have to ask you why a book on Smoking Joe or why a book on Muhammad Ali or, people of this ilk. I think there's always, a marketplace for those stories to certain people. And for Joe Frazier, certainly you being around it and seeing him. When did you come into the picture, as it relates to Ali and seeing those fights? I mean, I sat with Alan Goldstein at the end of his life.
Oh, yeah.
And Goldie and I were close. I mean, he's one of my mentors.
Lovely guy.
Wonderful man who sat and told me the stories, regaled me with the stories of driving up to Pennsylvania. Jackman has told me those stories as well over the years of seeing the fights and stuff. But part of it is where you come in and where you can tell the tale. And everybody wanted to be near Smoking Joe in the 70s in Philly, right?
Well, it's interesting. I grew up in Baltimore, and I guess at the end of the school year, I went to Loyola High School, and at the end of the school year, my father, who was a writer at Sports Illustrated, brought me to New York for a little holiday, and one of the things we did was go to the second Frazier-Jerry Quarry fight at the Garden. It was the first fight I'd seen live. I'd watched it, of course, on television, a lot of it, and it was an amazing night, Madison Square Garden, and, big heavyweight fight, and it just so happened that I got into sports writing, and it just so happened that I ended up in Philadelphia, and I got to know Joe. I guess I started in '87 in Philly, and I got to know Joe in the latter part of his life, where his dad knew him in the early part of his life. And, after he died, I thought, people are, there's been all these books on Ali, and everything's been told through his perspective, but, Joe was a iconic figure in his own right, and I thought it was important to do a biography on him where I could still get access to primary sources. 10 years from now, if somebody were to do a biography of Joe, they'd be drawing on all newspaper clippings and hearsay and what have you. But I made a great effort in the book to talk to people who Joe knew personally, in fact, including his last remaining sibling, and various other people who, let's face it, in 5-10 years from now, they're not going to be with us anymore. So I wanted to get it all down on the record as best I could.
Well, I mean, there have been various slanted sort of visions of all the things that went on with Ali and Frazier, and what perspective you read about Ali's life as well. And I remember the HBO film that came out was a whole different look on this, right? Like literally, there were many sides to this story, and the vilification of Frazier took in race, literally, right?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that I emerged from doing the book is that there was a lot more feeding Joe's anger towards Ali than meets the eye. I mean, Ali became a real, an irritant to Joe, of course. There's no question about that. But, Joe had a complicated life, and the book explores a lot of those complexities, and I really think gives a fresh look at exactly what was going on in that whole rivalry. And I think it's the kind of the story that can be told after both people are gone, but both rivals are gone, and when you sort of piece together the man's life, and you really see all the different things that were feeding some of his public issues. I mean, let's face it, in the 90s. Joe was furious at Ali. He wanted to push him into the Olympic flame and everything else. I mean, it was really unbecoming of a guy who was really, really really kind of a sweetheart at nature. Joe is a good guy. That's one thing that emerged from this book. He really was a generous man, and in a lot of ways,
he always showed up in Baltimore for fights and stuff. He would come down here. I mean, he was a real ambassador in a lot of ways for people who loved the sport in the 80s and the 90s, but he was outspoken and no one could shut him up. And right. I mean, literally, and Ali, well, no one could shut Ali up either. The only thing that shut Ali up was Parkinson's, right? Literally. And by the way, Mark Kram Jr. is here. We're going to get to some Orioles. The book is Smoking Joe, The Life of Joe Frazier. If you know anything about Mark Kram Jr., you probably know a little bit about Mark Kram and boxing and and Ali and all that. How much of that was in your bloodline to have had a preconceived opinion? Look, my dad didn't cover fights for a living, and my dad didn't fly over the world, and like Alan Goldstein going up with Ali. I didn't even get taken as a kid, up to the hills to see Ali train, as some of my friends like Mike Marlowe did when they were young, and Dick Girardi. They love to tell the story about how they got in the car and went up to Pennsylvania and saw Ali fight or train, and Ali took him under his wing, and there was nobody. All these incredible stories of Ali, but Frazier was in the other camp, and My dad hated Ali. You know, my dad was Archie Bunker, right? I grew up in Dundalk in the 1970s. My dad was a steelworker, and, you know, Nixon and Kennedy and all that. My dad admired Kennedy and FDR, and my dad didn't like Elvis and, you know, all that Eisenhower stuff, I should say. I just had John Eisenberg on, so I don't want to mix Eisenberg and Eisenhower. But the eye with which you saw Howard Cosell would probably color the first time you saw Howard Cosell and what you thought about him, right? And so I'm a kid that grew up in the 70s, never seeing those fights because they were on closed circuit, and I was a kid, and my dad loved Sugar Ray and the Duran fights and Hagler. So I grew up in a house where my dad watched a lot more boxing than, let's say, horse racing, right? And I grew up in a real sports house. I mean, my dad loved baseball, basketball, football, you know, the whole deal. But boxing was a part of my childhood because my dad loved it. Grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and all that stuff. So I had a preconceived. A dad gave me an opinion about all these fighters in one way or another.
Yeah.
And the Frazier Ali thing was fascinating because I remember all the feedback as to who won Foreman Ali fights and all that stuff in the 70s, you know?
Sure, yeah.
Well, you had a dad that was in it, though, like literally, right?
Well, he was certainly the preeminent boxing writer of his time at Sports Illustrated. He covered all three Frazier Ali fights.
Lottie, he's great, right?
Lottie, he's great. That's right. The Thrill in Manila. He was there, and in fact, it was probably his finest moment as a sports writer. But, you know, certainly Dad and I were very close over the years, and, you know, so we talked about this, you know, a lot over the years. But, you know, I have my own views of Joe and those days, and it's informed by my reporting, you know. And as I do with every story, every book I do, I try to start out with a clean slate as best I can, and sort of let the facts inform the narrative. So that's what I did in this case. But you know, Dad was quite a character, that's for sure, and he was part of a time that's now called the golden age of, you know, boxing, and rightly so.
Mark Kram Jr., the book is Smokin' Joe, The Life of Joe Frazier. Mark was a little bit of a legend to me up in Philadelphia, right, when I was a kid coming up and covering all the sports up there. And certainly you have taken your love of the Orioles, and you're a Baltimorean, always will be.
Right.
You still love the Orioles in a way that is hard to from 100 miles away. I know you were a 13-game season ticket holder and driving down and all of that stuff. Where are you at 50,000 feet and 100 miles away as a, you know, like me, a washed-up old sports writer and writing books and waiting for the Orioles for good times again? You know what I mean?
Well, I bleed orange and black, you know, since the early 60s. I just, you know, these are my guys. However, it's not a newsflash that this is basically a AAA team that they're putting out there and charging major league prices for, and maybe not even a AAA team, maybe a AA team. It's really,
well, it depends on whether they lose 100 or 115, right? I mean,
right. So, you know, I don't think they're expecting much. I saw an AP story where he said that the guy said, well, they're not expecting to be playing in October. Heck, this team might not even be playing in May. You know what I mean? It's like they could be, I mean, it would be great if they could be competitive a little bit, but I don't see how they could even be competitive with that pitching staff or the starting staff. It's just, it's not exactly a hatful of winners, those guys, you know, and, you know, I really think that, you know, I applaud their efforts to sort of start from scratch, but I think their cuts went a little too deep, frankly.
Well, giving Gausman away probably wasn't a good idea.
Gausman, he was the guy with a little bit of ability. He looked like...
it's amazing how he found that the minute he got to Atlanta, right? It's incredible.
Right. So which calls into question, how are these guys being coached? I mean, I think Roger McDowell was a really bad choice for a pitching coach, and yet they stuck with him. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I was out there 2 years ago watching Miley walk 11 Yankees in about 4 innings, and it was just someone's unbelievable. These guys were, And then he went on to Milwaukee, and he really lit it up. So it makes you wonder really what they're kind of feeding these guys down there. But in any case, my point is that they are just it's pretty.
You're a writer in your speech, which you can't even come up with like a synonym for woebegone.
I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's just, and it's become more expensive than ever. So you've got to ask yourself.
Yeah, you pay for it. I don't. Yeah, I'm not being a dick. I mean, I'm not giving them my money. I don't. It's not that I don't know what it costs. I do know I can go over there and get in for $20. Hell, I can get in for free a lot. But I mean, the concessions, and I live 4 blocks away, and the game's on TV, and now they're not going to win. I mean, they had some chances recently. You know, Mark, the real issue for me in the big picture is what's the future here for the franchise and the city. And I'm doing a Baltimore Positive mission here and launching a Baltimore Positive platform to talk about the city, and you drive into it. You're from here. I hate that we become a punchline, bro. I know you hate it being a Baltimorean, and you drive in here and see it and try to get in and get the hell out, and you don't run down to the aquarium. You're not dropping dough at a restaurant here and like all that when you come in. I live at the harbor. I see where it is, and the baseball team was part of fixing this thing. Mayor Schaefer getting the stadiums built.
Sure,
that's the reason you want a sports team, is to help the community, to be a big revenue generator. That's why we built the stadium. We're 3 years away on a renegotiation on a lease. There's no money here. There's no Fortune 500 companies. The Ravens are struggling right now financially
and
to
the
sell
crime
tickets.
rate is
well, yeah, and law and order, it has to start with there, which we don't have that right now.
There was a piece in the New York Times Sunday magazine.
Oh, you saw that too. I imagine that. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so it's no secret that the bloom is off the rose down there in a lot of ways. But, you know, I don't know, you know, for me, they don't have to be in the, like, win the championship every year or every other year or every 10 years. But they got to be competitive. They got to be in there, in the hunt, you know, play meaningful baseball, right? And I don't see them playing meaningful baseball this year. So how do they expect even a fan like myself?
And they're asking a lot of you.
This.
You've been a lifetime. They're asking you to give up a day, spend money, pay tolls, get in a car, drive down 4, 5, 6, whatever it would be from Philadelphia, and you're asking yourself on July 23rd why you're doing that. Why you're just not going and having a nice glass of wine in the country, or just going down and seeing Bryce Harper play, right? Literally.
Yeah, well, Bryce Harper, you know, there's another interesting you bring his name up.
Oh, here we go. Now I'm going to wind up Mark Kram Jr.
They signed him to 13 years. Don't they read the papers? Don't they see what happened with Chris Davis in a long-term contract? I mean, to me, you don't get the best out of these guys when you sign them to these long-term deals. I think it's human nature. You just don't get a player who's playing at the peak of his performance when you've got him signed up for 13 years for that sort of money. It's just that simple. I mean, Davis they're in the third year of a 7-year deal, $161 million. The guy doesn't even belong in the big leagues at this point. I mean, and now
they're going to make that argument by putting him in the lineup on opening day, but I hear you. Yeah,
they're stuck with him now for the length of that contract, unless they want to eat it.
Well, you saw that with Ryan Howard in Philly, and this isn't going to go nearly as well as that went. That didn't go well.
Right, and you know, these contracts, and it all falls back onto the fan. The fan ends up paying the freight for this, and Harper, to me, is above average player, but I don't see the greatness in him that others do by any stretch of the imagination. Remember, I grew up in an era, you know, we just lost Frank Robinson. I mean, you're talking players that were just really superstar players. I mean, day in and day out. I mean, Hank Aaron and Frank Robinson and, you know, Ernie Banks. And these are guys.
All those guys woke up hungry every day, too, though. Those guys didn't wake up with $100 million in the bank, let alone $400 million, right?
Right. So how are you going to – you got $330 million. You go through a bad spell. The Philly fans are going to be all over him. And he's going to get more pissed off. It's just going to be – and you're going to get 13 years of this? Give me a break. I mean, maybe there's a way that they'll contractually wiggle out of it if it goes too sour. But really, and now Trout got even more. So, but I just don't see the economics of this. Where's the ceiling on this, Nestor?
Well, where's the floor if you're Adam Jones and you're still a credible baseball player in your 30s and they're just not going to sign you ever again for any amount of money? And look, dude, you and I have been at this a long time. You're older than me, smarter than me, and we're covering this professionally. When I was a kid, 81, the strike, my dad canceled the Sporting News. He took it out on the Sporting News. You know what I mean? Like, literally, he got pissed at Sporting News because it no longer had box scores in it. I go back to all of that, and, me having my career wiped out in 1994 in a baseball-only town where Budweiser kept me in business at that time, and George Acton and John Dow, thank God for them. Here we are all over again. I mean, how's this war going to go down when they're asking Machado and Harper and these guys, when Max Scherzer saying, dude, we're walking. I don't care how much money you have. We're walking. I don't know who the Mark Belangers and the pricks are going to be amongst the MLBPA, or who the Marvin Miller or who the Don Fear is going to be to stop what they've done, which is colluding against the veteran players, very obviously. Now it's an active war, and it's like they just think these pretty boys making millions of dollars aren't going to behave the way Mark Belanger did 35 years ago. And you know what, Mark? They might be right. They might be right
about that because you can see the contracts that are kind of who they're buying out and their superstars that they're extending at this point. The truth of the matter, I think it's a disgrace that there wasn't a market for Adam Jones. A disgrace. And I think that there's a lot of other players that are being edged out of the game.
Yeah, Dallas Keuchel couldn't help the Orioles or anything like that. Be a major league team.
Yeah, exactly. So we got to watch a bunch of AA and AAA players in major league uniforms.
And at the end of the day, that money only goes one place. It goes into the John and Lou Angelos family fund. Literally, that's where when the money isn't invested on the field, that's where the money goes. They'll tell you it goes to the Dominican and Venezuela and all that. And yeah, that's you're talking about pennies. You're talking about the jimmies on the ice cream, not the ice cream here. You're talking about $20,000 here, $30,000 there. You can add it all up. It doesn't add up to Dallas Keuchel.
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. I still get the fan or the surveys that the club sends out in the off-season.
Oh, wow.
And it's all based on marketing, all based on, the souvenirs and the junk that they give out. And it has nothing to do with the quality on the field. They have to, for baseball to be effective in a town, as I said earlier, meaningful baseball. They got to play meaningful baseball, and they haven't for a long time. And it's an awful expensive day in the sun at this point.
He is Mark Kram Jr. He's going to spend that day in the sun with your Baltimore Orioles this year. Coming down from Philadelphia. He has done a book on Smoking Joe Frazier. It's not out yet. Doesn't come out till June, but you can order it, Amazon, wherever books are sold. Smoking Joe, The Life of Joe Frazier, available in June. I'll get you back on when the Orioles are 20 games under 500. Not a moment before, Kram. So I'll be with you sometime around Preakness, and then we'll bitch about how the Preakness is leaving Baltimore too. So
oh my God, that's awful.
Well,
okay.
The industry has to stay alive, and look, I'm going to save that for another day, and I'm not going to blame that on Baltimore or the Stronics or the DeFrancises or the economy or anything else or the city or to me, that's its own interesting story to say how the city didn't embrace the race the way it needed to be embraced over the last 50 years. And when's the last time you went to Churchill Downs for a derby? I'm sure you've been to a couple, right, Mark?
Actually, I haven't.
You've never been...
I've never been to Churchill.
All right. Well, then listen.
That was Dick Girardi's thing.
Yeah, to have Dick take you down there. Well, one year, go down to the Derby. Go early. Go on. You want to be there on Friday to see what happens in the city because it really becomes like a celebration of being from Kentucky. You know what I mean? It's not about a horse or a bar or a party. It's a celebration it's a civic celebration. And I think we missed that in Baltimore. We missed that in Baltimore.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
All right, brother, take care of yourself. Good luck
Thanks.
selling the book, and, go watch the Phillies or some relevant baseball. Do yourself a favor.
Thanks a million.
You got it. Go get a Tug
Bye-bye.
McGraw hat or something, please. There he goes, Mark Kram Jr., great sports writer. Dad was a great sports writer as well and has written a book on Joe Frazier, and I'm sure it's going to be great. I don't have it in my hands, but when I get it in my hands, we'll bring Mark back on. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. Spanning the globe to bring you Oriole fans that'll come on and talk honestly about what this is. We got March Madness. We've got, owners meetings, the draft ahead, things happening. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.